Welcome back to another episode of Chillin' with Cool Dudes, featuring your hosts, me, Connor McCullough, and Nick Panagas.
Today for Throwback Thursday, we're going back in time with our special guests, history experts, Chris Anderson and John Dolan.
And I'd like to remind everyone that this podcast is sponsored by
S.C. Johnson, a family company.
Thanks for having us, Nick. It's a pleasure.
So, what are you guys doing or going to be talking about today?
Today we are going to be diving into the post-classical period, specifically big innovations and impactful events. So, Chris, what's an event you find most impactful from the post-classical period?
To start, we'll talk about some events that sparked innovations during the post-classical period. I think that the support of the Spanish on Columbus's voyages sparked major innovations, and here's how. Because Columbus's voyages were so successful, it provoked transoceanic trade and travel from Europeans.
Because of all that travel and trade, Europeans learned from other nations like Asia and Islam and had major innovations.
Well, what kind of innovations, John?
Things like advancements in tools and improvements in maritime skills like sailing. So with those innovations in sailing, I guess they could trade more efficiently, right?
Exactly. Things like ship innovations and a better understanding of global wind and current patterns made a huge difference in maritime trading.
So, what kind of systems of trading did they develop?
Huge trading posts were set up in places like Africa and Asia, which resulted in trading empires.
That's great, John, but let's talk about the Columbian Exchange for a minute.
Oh yeah, I think I know a little bit about that. A bunch of disease was spread, right? That's exactly right, Nick. Diseases like typhus, smallpox, and measles were spread. But there's much more going on with the Columbian Exchange.
Much, much more. The connection between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere led to tons of things to be exchanged, including plants and animals.
Indeed, Chris, indeed. Arguably one of the biggest events from the post-classical period was the Columbian Exchange, which was the Eastern and Western Hemisphere exchanging goods, which mostly impacted the hemispheres mostly positively, yet also had some negative effects.
Chris, can you elaborate on that for us and the viewers at home?
Yeah, one of the most negative impacts of the Columbian Exchange was the spread of slavery across the ocean. Europeans would trade guns and other goods to the Africans in exchange for slaves who were exported through the Columbian Exchange.
Also, not to mention, the diseases that came along with all the goods traded included smallpox, measles, and malaria, which affected populations greatly. So, the Columbian Exchange was mainly a bad thing?
No, the Columbian Exchange had a lot of great impacts, including the Western Hemisphere, gaining honey, bees, pigs, sheep, cattle, coffee, and various fruits, and the Eastern Hemisphere gaining tobacco, llamas, rubber, peanuts, and various different types of vegetables.
Now I see why the Columbian Exchange had such an overall and large impact on the world.
That just amazes me. Now, what can you tell us and the viewers about more of the labor and social aspect of the post-classical period? Well, for starters, resources like food and consumer goods were in high demand. This caused a major increase in peasant and artisan labor in many regions during the post-classical region.
Interesting. Was peasant and artisan labor the only kind of labor needed for the increase of resources?
No, enslavement of Africans increased as well due to the growth of the plantation economy in the Americas.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, there were about 10 to 12 million Africans enslaved from Africa during the post-classical period.
Wow!
Africans were captured by other Africans, oftentimes prisoners of war, and traded to the Europeans for goods.
Slaves were branded and used for labor, some housework, some skilled craft work, and some were even sailors. But the majority of slaves were used for agricultural labor, working on the farms.
So what kind of crops did they farm?
Crops like sugar and tobacco were very popular.
Interesting. So let's switch topics here. In what ways and how did empires evolve during this time period?
Well, due to all the conquering of different ethnic groups and peoples during the post-classical period, certain religious and ethnic practices were needed in order to accommodate for the conquered people.
The Ottoman and Safavid empires were prime examples of this.
So what kind of practices did they introduce?
In certain areas like the Republic of Indios, conquered people were given separate legal and religious status, oftentimes segregated themselves and lived in separate communities.
Oh, so the empires tried to build around and work with and include the people they conquered? Interesting.
Well, we're running short on time. Thank you guys for coming out to the show.
Thank you guys, it's always a pleasure.
Now, everyone remember, this podcast is sponsored by
S.C. Johnson, a family company.